Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we are going super deep into the book Hu Fai Hong, and I'm really excited to have you along.
Me too.
So the book, as you know, is all about making those tough choices, the ones that really shape our careers, our relationships, our principles.
Yeah. The kind of stuff that keeps you up at night.
Exactly. And what really struck me, the author said this book actually came out of his biggest takeaway from Harvard Business School.
Wow.
It's this idea of really taking the time to reflect on those big decisions,
Mm.
not just letting life happen to us.
That's so important, and I think a lot of our listeners will relate to that. Trying to balance, the goals we have for our careers and our personal lives, wanting to make the most of everything, but not feeling overwhelmed in the process.
Yeah.
It's tough. So I think having a framework, some guiding principles like this book provides, that can be a huge help.
Absolutely. And, no matter who you are or where you come from, we all face these same fundamental questions. How do you build a career you actually enjoy, not just one that looks good on paper?
Right.
How do you cultivate those happy, strong relationships with your partner, your kids, your friends? And how do you hold on to your principles?
Mm.
Make sure you're living a life you're proud of.
Big questions for sure.
And the author starts by making this really interesting observation. He says he's noticed a lot of people who seem to have it all on the surface, like the great jobs, the money, the success,
Right.
but they're not truly fulfilled.
Yeah.
They're struggling in their work. They have unhappy marriages. They have strained relationships with their kids.
It's like that saying, money can't buy happiness.
Exactly. So
Okay.
the goal of this book, and what we want to do today, is to dig into the principles and strategies that can help us avoid those pitfalls and actually build a life that's truly fulfilling, both personally and professionally. So, you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so the first part of the book focuses on work, which makes sense, right?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a huge part of our lives for most of us.
Totally. And right off the bat, it kicks off with this amazing Steve Jobs quote.
Oh, yeah. Which one is that?
It's that one that says, "The only way to do great work is to love what you do."
Powerful stuff.
And the book really emphasizes this idea that you have to love your work. It's not just about finding a job that pays the bills. It's about finding work that genuinely excites you, that you're passionate about.
I think a lot of us settle.
Right. And the book actually warns against that. It says, if you consistently choose work that you don't truly enjoy, it can really drain you. You can lose your sense of self.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So the takeaway here is to actively search for work that brings you satisfaction, that makes you feel alive.
Okay. So let's say you're looking for that kind of work. How do you actually find it?
Well, the book introduces this really interesting idea of thinking strategically about your career. And it's just like how a company would approach strategic planning. You got to set your goals, identify those opportunities and potential threats, and figure out how to best allocate your resources.
Resources. Like what specifically?
Like your time, your skills, your experience, all those things you bring to the table.
Okay. Yeah.
And it stresses that you got to be flexible because life rarely goes exactly as planned. You need to be ready to adjust your strategies when those unexpected challenges pop up.
Right. Things never go as planned.
And the book also talks about this common trap that we fall into.
Which is,
Prioritizing those tasks that give us those quick rewards, those immediate feelings of accomplishment,
oh, I see.
like checking things off your to-do list.
Yeah.
It feels good in the moment.
Yeah, for sure.
But the book points out that the things that are truly meaningful, the things that build a lasting and fulfilling career, those often take a lot more time and effort. They don't always offer that instant gratification.
So it's about being patient and playing the long game.
Exactly.
Got it. So how do you actually stay motivated?
That's a great question. And to answer that, the book dives into the motivation hygiene theory.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So basically it says there are two types of factors that influence how we feel about our jobs. First, you've got those hygiene factors. Things like salary, work environment, company policies.
Basic stuff.
Yeah. And if these things are bad, they'll definitely make you unhappy. But the key point is that even if they're amazing, they won't necessarily make you love your job.
Okay, so even with a great salary and a fancy office, you might still feel unfulfilled.
Right. Because it's the motivation factors that really drive that passion.
So what are those?
Things like the challenge of the work itself, the recognition you get, the responsibility you're given, and the opportunities for growth and advancement.
I see. So it's more about the work itself and how it makes you feel.
Exactly. And the book even gives the example of people working in nonprofits. They're often not motivated by money, but by a sense of purpose. by a desire to make a difference.
So it's the intrinsic motivation that really matters.
Right. And the book uses this great analogy of kids building a treehouse. The real joy comes from the process of building it together, not just from having the finished product.
Yeah, I get that. It's about the journey, not just the destination.
And on the flip side, the book cautions against chasing money and titles as your primary goals. It says that those external things don't bring true happiness.
Right. It's about finding fulfillment in the work itself.
So if you're listening and maybe feeling a bit lost in your career, the book offers some really helpful questions to ask yourself.
Like what?
Things like, does my work feel meaningful? Does this job give me opportunities to grow? Am I learning new things? Do I feel valued? Those sorts of questions.
Yeah, those are good ones to ponder.
They can help you figure out if you're on the right track or if you need to make some adjustments.
So let's say you've asked yourself those questions and you realize you need a change. What then?
Well, the book talks about two main paths you can take to find more fulfilling work. The first is the deliberate strategy. It's all about setting clear goals and having a structured plan to reach them.
Okay, the traditional approach.
But then there's also the emergent strategy.
What's that?
It's about being flexible, adaptable, and open to those unexpected opportunities that come up along the way.
So it's like having a plan, but also being willing to deviate from it if something interesting comes up.
Exactly. And the book says the best approach often involves a bit of both. You need that balance between planning and flexibility.
Makes sense.
And then it introduces this idea of discovery-driven planning.
What's that all about?
It's about really digging into the assumptions you're making about your career plans, especially when you're thinking about switching jobs or making a big change.
Right.
You need to actively test those assumptions and make sure they actually hold true.
So it's about being realistic and not just going in blind.
Exactly.
Got it.
And another really important point the book makes is that success rarely happens overnight. It's all about experimenting, adapting, and constantly learning until you find that right fit.
So true. There's no magic formula.
And even with all the motivation and smart strategies in the world, you won't get anywhere if you don't put in the work and make conscious choices about where you focus your energy.
So it all comes down to resource allocation.
Exactly.
Okay.
How you choose to allocate your time, your money, your energy that ultimately determines your success.
Makes sense.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Go on.
The book says that sometimes decisions that might seem counterintuitive or even a bit harmful in the short term can actually be really important for achieving your long-term goals.
Oh, like delaying gratification for something bigger down the road.
Exactly. It's that constant tension between what feels good right now and what will truly benefit you in the long run.
Okay, I see.
And it's not just about work either.
What do you mean?
This idea of resource allocation applies to our personal lives too.
Yeah.
The book highlights the importance of making a conscious effort to invest our time and energy in our relationships.
Right, because those are important too.
Absolutely.
And I feel like it's so easy to get caught up in work and let those relationships slide.
It is.
Yeah.
And the book shares some really impactful stories about successful people who poured everything into their careers, but ended up neglecting their families, and they later regretted it deeply.
Oh, wow.
And the point is that it usually doesn't happen because of one big bad decision. It's a series of small choices, maybe even unconscious choices, that we make over time.
Like death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly.
Wow.
So the key message here is that how we actually spend our time and energy, those are our true priorities. And if there's a mismatch between what we say is important and how we actually allocate our resources, well, we're not going to get the results we want.
Makes sense. You got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about work.
Yeah.
What about relationships?
Well, that's actually the second big focus of the book. And it starts by reminding us that life is more than just work.
Which is easy to forget,
Yeah,
right? We get so caught up in our careers, we can lose sight of what truly matters.
absolutely. And the book stresses that we got to pay attention to that inner voice. Make sure our pursuit of success aligns with our values and what we truly cherish in life.
So it's about finding that balance between ambition and what truly matters to us.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it also gives us some reassurance. It says if our efforts to improve our relationships don't yield immediate results, it doesn't mean we failed.
Okay, that's good to hear.
It just means we might need to adjust our approach, try different strategies.
Right, because every relationship is different.
And it acknowledges that we can't control everything when it comes to relationships, especially with kids. They're their own people, and they're going to be influenced by all sorts of things.
So it's not always our fault. if things don't go perfectly.
Right. And it uses this great analogy of parenting being like cooking.
Oh, I like this analogy.
There's no single recipe that works for every child. You got to experiment, you got to adjust based on the ingredients you're working with.
That's a really helpful way to think about it.
And it encourages us to keep the faith, to not give up when things get tough, to reframe challenges as opportunities to find the right approach.
Yeah, because relationships are worth the effort.
Absolutely. And the book really emphasizes how crucial those close relationships are for our happiness.
They're the foundation of a good life.
And it talks about this idea of the ticking clock of relationships.
That sounds ominous. What's that all about?
It's this reminder that we can't put off investing in our relationships. Those connections with our family, our friends, they're precious. And neglecting them can lead to irreparable damage.
Like we might not get a second chance.
Right. And then it introduces these really interesting concepts, good money and bad money, in the context of relationships.
I'm curious, how does that work?
So good money is like finding effective strategies that require a small initial investment before you scale them up. Like finding little ways to show appreciation, to connect, to make those small gestures that build over time.
I see.
And bad money is like chasing those quick fixes, those temporary boosts of happiness while neglecting the long-term health of the relationship.
Okay, so it's like those grand gestures that might feel good in the moment, but don't actually address the underlying issues.
Exactly. And the book warns that if we treat work like bad money, always chasing that next promotion or raise, we might miss out on those opportunities to invest in our relationships. And that can lead to loneliness and regret.
Wow, that's powerful.
And it specifically highlights the importance of investing in our kids early on.
From the very beginning.
Yeah, it talks about how crucial those first 30 months are for a child's development. It says that having those rich conversations, using complex language with them, it actually impacts their cognitive abilities and sets them up for success later in life.
Really?
Yeah.
So, like, even just talking to your baby can make a difference.
It can.
That's amazing.
And it emphasizes that those everyday conversations are incredibly valuable learning opportunities for kids.
So, like, every interaction counts.
Yeah. It's not just about formal education. It's about creating a stimulating environment where they can learn and grow from every interaction.
Okay.
And the book stresses that maintaining those strong relationships, it takes consistent effort, just like any investment.
It's not a one-time thing.
Right.
You got to keep putting in the work.
And it warns against prioritizing those short-term demands and unintentionally neglecting the people who matter most to us.
It's so easy to do, though, right? Especially when you're busy.
It is.
Yeah.
But the book reminds us that we can't afford to put off building those connections. It's something we need to prioritize now if we want to have a truly fulfilling life.
Makes sense. So what else does the book talk about in terms of relationships?
Well, it dives into this really fascinating concept of understanding other people's jobs to be done.
Jobs to be done. I'm not sure I follow.
Okay, so this idea comes from the business world.
Okay.
It's basically saying that if you want to create successful products, you need to deeply understand what your customers are actually trying to achieve. What problems are they trying to solve? What needs are they trying to meet?
So it's not just about selling them what you think they want. It's about figuring out what they actually need.
Exactly. And the book says we can apply this same thinking to our relationships.
How so?
Instead of just focusing on our own needs, we need to try to understand what the other person is looking for in the relationship. What's their underlying job to be done?
Okay, I see.
Like with IKEA.
IKEA.
Yeah. Their success wasn't just about selling affordable furniture.
Right.
It was about understanding that their customers' job to be done was furnishing their homes in a stylish, practical, and affordable way.
Okay, I see. They tapped into a deeper need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when it comes to relationships, if we can understand what the other person truly needs, it strengthens the connection.
Makes sense.
And the book even applies this concept to school.
School.
It suggests that the underlying job for students isn't just about acquiring knowledge.
What else is it about?
It's about developing a sense of accomplishment and building meaningful friendships.
Interesting. So it's about the social and emotional aspects as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the book talks about marriage through this jobs to be done lens. It says that the happiest couples are those who actively consider and try to fulfill each other's needs.
So it's not just about finding someone who makes you happy. It's about being someone who makes your partner happy.
Exactly. It's a shift from a me-focused to a we-focused approach.
Right, because relationships are a two-way street.
And it emphasizes that strong friendships and families aren't just built on getting what you want. They require sacrifice and dedication.
Yeah, you got to put in the work to make those relationships strong.
And that's what leads to commitment, a mutual respect.
Makes sense.
So true empathy, according to the book, is about understanding those fundamental needs of another person. It's about asking yourself, what does this person need from me right now?
It's about putting their needs before your own sometimes.
Right. But it's not just about understanding. It's about actually taking action, about putting your loved one's happiness first.
And that can be hard sometimes, right?
It can be. But the book argues that it ultimately leads to greater happiness and fulfillment for everyone involved. It strengthens the relationship through that shared investment and care.
Okay.
So now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about resource management in families. The book introduces this really thought-provoking analogy of the ship of Theseus. Have you heard of that?
I'm not sure. Remind me.
It's this ancient Greek thought experiment. Imagine a ship that's gradually repaired over time. As each part wears out, it's replaced with a new one. Eventually, all the original parts are gone, and the question is it still the same ship?
Interesting.
And the book uses this to talk about parenting. It says that parents often focus so much on providing resources for their kids, money, opportunities, activities, that they sometimes neglect their kids' own development.
Like they're so busy giving them the parts that they forget to help them build the actual ship.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it brings in the example of Dell outsourcing their motherboard manufacturing.
Dell.
Yeah, the computer company. So Dell decided to outsource to save money, and initially it seemed like a good decision, but it actually ended up weakening their core capabilities and making them less competitive.
I see. So it's about not just relying on external resources, but also developing those internal skills and knowledge.
Right. And the book applies this same thinking to kids. It says that kids' resources are things like money, time, knowledge, and experiences. Their processes are how they learn and grow, and parents should help them develop those processes, not just keep giving them more resources.
Right. So it's about teaching them how to fish, not just giving them fish.
Exactly. And the book warns against this trend of resource-led education, where kids are overscheduled with activities and given everything they could ever want, but they don't actually learn how to solve problems or deal with challenges on their own. It says if kids are constantly being directed and they never have to struggle, they won't develop that resilience and resourcefulness.
Yeah, it's those struggles that actually make you stronger.
And it highlights that true confidence comes from facing challenges and overcoming them, not from just having a ton of resources.
So sometimes the best thing parents can do is step back and let their kids figure things out.
Sometimes, yeah. The book even says that the opportunities we don't provide can be the most valuable gifts
Interesting.
because it gives them the space to learn and grow on their own.
Makes sense.
And it talks about timing, too.
How so?
It says that kids learn best when they're ready, when they're motivated, not just when we decide it's time for them to learn something.
Okay, so it's about respecting their individual pace.
Exactly. So the key takeaway here is that the best way to prepare our kids for the future isn't to shield them from every difficulty or give them every advantage. It's to teach them how to think critically, solve problems, and face challenges with resilience. Those are the skills that will really serve them well in life.
So true.
And building on that idea of learning through challenges, the book emphasizes that kids need to have the opportunity to experience setbacks.
To fail.
Yeah. It says that those moments of struggle, even failure, are where they develop those essential skills to overcome future obstacles.
It builds character.
And it compares this to how companies look at potential hires.
Yeah.
They look beyond just grades and resumes. They want to see evidence of problem-solving skills, of resilience.
Makes sense. They want to know you can handle the tough stuff.
Exactly.
So what should parents do?
The book says we need to resist that urge to constantly jump in and fix everything for our kids. We need to let them make their own choices, face those natural consequences, and learn from those experiences.
Yeah, you got to let them make their own mistakes.
And it reiterates that true capability isn't just about accomplishments. It's about those lived experiences of overcoming challenges.
So like resisting the urge to overprotect our kids is actually good for them in the long run?
Exactly. It can be tough to watch them struggle, but it's essential for their growth. And the book encourages us to view our kids' successes not just as external achievements, but as evidence of their learning and progress. It's about celebrating their growth, not just their trophies.
Okay, that's a good perspective.
And this all leads into the last big point the book makes about relationships.
Which is?
The power of family culture.
Family culture.
Yeah, it describes it as this invisible force that shapes our kids' decisions and behaviors. kind of like how company culture shapes how employees act.
I see. So it's the values and beliefs that guide the family.
Exactly. And it says that this culture isn't created overnight. It's a long-term process of sharing and embodying those values in everything you do.
So it's about leading by example.
Exactly. A strong family culture helps kids understand what's truly important and make decisions that align with those values even when you're not around. It fosters cooperation, respect, and responsibility.
That's what every parent wants, right?
And it emphasizes that creating this culture requires consistent action from parents. It's not just about saying the right things, it's about doing the right things. Every interaction is an opportunity to reinforce or undermine that culture.
So it's about being mindful and intentional in everything you do.
Exactly. And it's important to involve the kids in this process, to make them feel like valued members of the family, to give them opportunities to contribute and to learn those life skills.
Makes sense.
The ultimate goal is to give them an internal compass, guided by that strong family culture, so they can make good decisions on their own.
So it's about equipping them for life beyond the family.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've covered work and relationships.
Right.
What about principles?
Ah, yes. That's the third big piece of the puzzle. And the book kicks off this section by contrasting two ways of thinking: comprehensive thinking and marginal thinking.
Okay. Tell me more about those.
So comprehensive thinking is about looking at the big picture, considering all the factors, and making decisions based on your core principles and long-term goals.
Okay.
And marginal thinking is about focusing on those incremental gains and losses, evaluating each decision based on its immediate costs and benefits.
I see.
And while marginal thinking might seem logical on the surface, the book argues that it can be really dangerous
How so?
because it can lead us to make compromises that violate our principles or to miss out on big opportunities because we're too focused on the short term.
So, like, we might make decisions that seem good in the moment, but ultimately lead us down the wrong path.
Exactly. And it uses the example of Blockbuster and Netflix.
Blockbuster?
Yeah, the video rental company. Remember them?
Vaguely. I'm pretty young, you know.
Yeah. Well, Blockbuster was doing great for a while, but then they started using marginal thinking.
How so?
They thought, well, this whole online DVD rental thing, it's just a small market. It won't really affect us.
But it did.
It did. They completely missed the boat on Netflix and ended up going bankrupt.
Wow.
So that's a classic example of how marginal thinking can lead to disaster.
Okay, so what's the takeaway?
The takeaway is that we need to be aware of this trap. We can't get so caught up in those small, incremental decisions that we lose sight of the big picture.
Right. We need to keep our eyes on the prize.
And the book also warns that our past successes can actually hold us back. We get attached to what's worked before, and we're reluctant to change, even when it's necessary.
So it's like we become prisoners of our own success.
Exactly. And it can lead to missed opportunities and even total failure.
Okay, so how do we avoid that?
By being willing to adapt, to challenge our assumptions, to embrace new ideas, even if they seem risky.
So it's about being open to change.
Right. And the book gives another example of this.
Which is
Old steel mills.
steel mills. What do they have to do with this?
So these old mills, they were doing things the same way for decades.
Okay.
And then new, more efficient mills came along. But the old mills, they were so focused on their existing costs, on those marginal calculations, that they didn't see the threat.
So they were too slow to adapt.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they ended up going out of business.
Wow.
So the point is that sometimes you have to be willing to make big changes, even if it means short-term losses. Because if you don't, you might lose everything.
Okay, I see.
And this all ties into this really important idea of the slippery slope. The book says that making small compromises can lead to bigger and bigger compromises over time.
Like once you cross that line, it becomes easier to cross it again.
Exactly. And it gives the example of Nick Leeson.
Who's that?
He was a trader who made a small mistake, and then he tried to cover it up. Then he made another mistake and another, and it just spiraled out of control.
What happened?
His actions ended up causing the collapse of Barings Bank, one of the oldest banks in the world.
Wow. So one small compromise led to a huge disaster.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the book then offers this really counterintuitive idea. It says that it's actually easier to stick to 100% of your principles than to try to stick to, say, 98%.
That's interesting. Why is that?
Because once you allow yourself to make a small exception, it becomes harder to resist making another and another. It's like that line in the sand gets blurry.
I see. So it's better to be completely firm than to leave any wiggle room.
Exactly. And the book argues that this applies to individuals and businesses alike. You got to have those clear, non-negotiable principles that you stick to no matter what.
Makes sense. So it all comes back to that comprehensive thinking, looking at the big picture, sticking to your principles, and not getting too caught up in those marginal calculations.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
Well, the book concludes with this great quote from Peter Drucker. He said, "Few people ask themselves what their business is." This may sound like a very stupid question, but experience shows that it is not.
Okay.
And the book applies this to our lives in general. It's saying that most of us don't take the time to really define our purpose, our mission.
And why is that important?
Because without a clear sense of purpose, we can end up feeling lost and unfulfilled.
I see.
And the book offers this trilogy of purpose to help us define that purpose.
What's that?
First, there's the image. This is your vision, your ideal of the kind of person you want to be, the kind of life you want to create.
Okay.
Second, there's commitment. This is the actual work you put in, the actions you take to make that vision a reality.
Right.
And third, there are metrics. These are the ways you measure your progress, the standards you use to make sure you're on track.
So it's about having a vision, putting in the work, and tracking your progress.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that defining your purpose isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process that evolves as you grow and learn.
Makes sense.
And the book concludes with this really powerful idea. It says that a key to living a fulfilling life is to shift your focus from yourself to others.
What do you mean?
It's about focusing on helping others solve their problems, on building those deep, meaningful relationships with your loved ones.
So it's about giving back, about connecting with others.
Exactly. And it encourages us to define our own personal metrics for measuring the value of our lives. What really matters to us? What do we want to be remembered for?
That's a great question to ask yourself.